Tom O'Connell is a widely recognized health and medical writer, consultant, and lecturer on addiction and on healthy relating. He has created courses on these subjects at Cape Cod Community College. Tom is the author of Up in Smoke, Addicted, and Improving Intimacy. He also writes the popular Cape Cod Times advice column on addiction. Now, Tom O'Connell.
Hi, welcome to Understanding Addiction. We're going to talk about prevention today and education. In the world of highway safety, when I worked with the Massachusetts Safety Council, I learned that accidents didn't just happen. There were causes for accidents. They involved the driver, the vehicle, the environment, the weather. There were various factors. And it's similar with addiction. Addiction can be called an illness, a disorder, or a disease. And we're talking about many factors. We're talking about inherited tendencies. We're talking about stress that people are trying to deal with. We're talking about family influences, self-medication, cultural factors, and even the contagious nature of addiction. It's a very complicated subject. You know, addiction involves all kinds of things. It's not just drugs or alcohol. It's work, it's power, it's relationships, gambling, a whole range of behaviors, even perfectionism. When we talk about preventing addiction, what we're really dealing with, and let's go back to the word itself. The word prevent means to anticipate something or keep something from happening. So I need to ask some questions about this. When we're dealing with addiction, are we preventing addiction when we're punishing people, or when we're treating people, or when we're rehabilitating people? The majority of crimes and the majority of violence in our society is directly related to alcohol and other drugs and how they affect people. And when we imprison these people, how much treatment is going on and how much punishment is going on? How much follow-up is there after the incarceration? How much character development takes place with these people who are really addicts of one kind or another that got into trouble because of their addictions? Well, what we need to do to explore this is look at what unhealthy dependence is, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about addiction. It impairs our ability to perform to our full potential. Addiction is a disease. And in Latin, the word addict means devoted. And that's what's going on with addiction. We're devoted to a habit that we keep turning to, and it puts us in a kind of slavery. And this is really what it's all about. I'm not on a crusade to change everything that's going on in the prisons, but what I would like to see is more rehabilitation of addicts, no matter where they are, whether they're in prison or out of prison. Teenagers, for example, we have an escalating problem in smoking, especially for young women. This is happening throughout our society. And one of the problems with this is that cigarettes is what we call a gateway drug. When you take cigarettes, then you're much more likely to get involved a little later with marijuana, with beer, and then if you take marijuana and beer, you're much more likely to get involved with some other drug later. It's a step-by-step progression. Not that everyone gets involved with other things when they smoke, but a lot of people do. So what we need to think more about in prevention is how to set limits and how to guide people into understanding consequences of their behavior. Ideally, the parents should be modeling the behavior that the children are following. If we have healthy parents, that's what goes on. But if the parents are addicted, which is the case in many families, addicted to food, addicted to smoking, alcohol, so many other things, are the parents setting the role, doing the role playing for the children? Very often they're not. So we turn to the schools to help fill the gap because the clear messages are not coming through from the homes. One of the questions I would have is, are we exploring the fundamentals of addiction with the children? Are we teaching them what the 5 C's are, for example? The 5 C's of addiction, the craving, the compulsion, the loss of control, and continuing the behavior despite the life-damaging consequences. I believe these concepts should be taught at the earliest ages. We should help young people to know exactly what's going on with addiction, how it begins, and how it begins with just habit and eventually escalates to addiction. Young people, for example, in our society, tend to believe that heavy drinking is okay. And when they drink, they tend to drink to get drunk. So they're not just sipping on it socially, they're actually drinking in order to get drunk. In some surveys that have been done, they found out that the majority of high school students do drink fairly often, and the majority also have driven after drinking. So what are we doing about this? Much. There's quite a bit being done. We have alliances that have formed. We have community groups that have formed. We have educators working together with clergy and other people to educate the children. But the real question I would ask is it enough, and how are we doing it? I think that health and safety in the school systems should be a priority, not just something that we work in when all the other requirements are satisfied. And so I'd like to see more education in the school systems. I'd like to see things explained like the SAAH of addiction. I'd like young people to learn that just being human is what sets us up for addiction, and that by these natural factors like being anxious about separation from our loved ones and the need for attachment to other human beings, that's human and that's natural, and we're going to get the cravings, but how do we deal with them? I think we have to help young people understand how to do this. Also, I have a definition that I call Dr. Gitlow's definition, which describes addiction in a very interesting way. Addiction is a way we try to cope with life other than interpersonal relating. I think that's a message that we need to get across to all kinds of people. And I think this is prevention. I think when we teach people the elements of addiction that are basic, then we're helping to prevent the problem from emerging, or at least we're helping a person, when he or she becomes addicted, to identify it, to know it's happening, and then decide what to do about it. Unfortunately, there are a lot of mixed messages in the media. In one study by the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, a study of children from ages 2 to 18, they found out that during that period of their lives, they were exposed to 100,000 television ads for beer. And the messages that came through about the beer, other than the possibility of being addicted to it if you drank it too often, messages about romance, sexual stereotypes, having it all, outlaw themes. In other words, work hard, play hard. Beer goes with work, instead of mentioning the danger of working and drinking at the same time. The quitting time ritual, leisure activity. Thank God it's Friday. In other words, as if we're working all through the week and being serious so that we can get drunk on the weekend. Leisure time activity. And then the social acceptability. It's socially acceptable. And it's actually almost a sign of friendship based on these ads that we see, that if you want to have fun, have friends, be respected by everybody else, then you really should drink. It's a good thing to do, and do it with all these other people, and do quite a bit of it. So they're not telling us to go out and get drunk. I don't want to have anyone misinterpret me on that. The beer ads are not saying go out and get drunk. And the beverage producers actually try to do campaigns to help people not do that. But on the other hand, with something that makes us feel that good and changes our consciousness, there's a problem of escalating use, becomes habit, then it becomes addiction. We should be giving those messages in an equal way, at least, with the other messages that are coming through television. And we should help people to understand the addiction process and what it is. And in the addiction process, what we're doing is we experiment, and we've got a little visual that we can show you on this. We start with experimentation. It involves discomfort, if we talk about the cycle. But usually it's experimentation. We feel discomfort, then we experiment. We look for relief. We anticipate a love object that's going to make us feel better. And we work our way through this process, trying to relieve ourselves of our discomfort, and then we end up with withdrawal symptoms eventually. And that's the cycle. We feel the discomfort again. We go from discomfort to relief and then back to discomfort again. We also have something we call the OC of addiction, and that's the obsession and the compulsion. And this goes with all of the addictions. In the obsession, we feel haunted by our addiction, and in the compulsion, we feel driven to act on it and do something about it. Back to the children again. When the University of Michigan did a wonderful study at the Institute for Social Research, and they found that children from age 3 to 17 had television as their third most time-consuming activity. The number one was sleep. The thing they did the most was sleep. Number two was school. Number three was TV. On the weekends, guess what? TV moves to second place. So there are tremendous blocks of time available for prevention messages, for educational messages to reach the children. Some of this is being done. My only point is more should be done. And we should also be teaching the children sound values in the same process that we're teaching them about addiction. We should be conditioning them to ask questions about these various products that are being pushed at them. And we should tell them the truth about the fact that beer may be a harmless substance if you take only a certain amount of it, but beyond that it becomes very harmful. In alcohol education at the Cape Counseling Center, at one point I was teaching the drivers who got drunk, and the courts assigned them to these programs. And one of the myths that we had to deal with there was that beer was harmless. It wasn't a hard liquor, and that there was a difference between the two. That's a complete myth. Most of the people picked up for drinking and driving actually were drinking beer, and they were intoxicated. So beer intoxicates, and wine does, and whiskey does, and it's all based on the same thing. We aren't teaching enough of this, that a 12-ounce can of beer, a 5-ounce glass of wine, and an ounce and a half of whiskey are all the same thing as far as our nervous system is concerned, our brain, our body. And it does exactly the same thing to us. We have some more awareness today, but we have these mixed messages that concern me. One of them is about light beer. Well, if I'm addicted to something and I get a substance that's light, I will just drink more to get the same effect. So it isn't light beer that's going to prevent us from being addicted. It's changing our behaviors. So we need a lot more awareness on these subjects. Awareness on such things as the inherited tendencies, the allergy factors, and there are a number of factors to consider. Along with the allergy, we have sensitivity that some of us have more than others. We have dispositions that we may have, just as we have dispositions in other ways that come down through the generations in families, for example. We have tendencies. And that's why you can't really say that all people who drink are alike and will have the same effects, and all people who drug or all people who eat too much will have the same effects. We're all slightly different, and that's another message that needs to be gotten out there. From a prevention perspective, I would like to see more emphasis on the reality that addiction is an inner problem. It's not an outer problem. It's not to do with the fact that the convenience store is selling all kinds of products that can help me to be addicted. That might make it more easy for me to become addicted, but that's not the cause. Addiction the cause isn't the chocolate, the beer, and outside stuff. The basic cause is my craving to feel better, my desire for either increasing my pleasure or reducing my pain. So reducing the supply is only a temporary solution. We need to teach the values about the inner journey towards spiritual and mental wholeness. That's what we need to be teaching. So in addiction, we're just substituting various behaviors for personal growth. Instead of growing in a right way, we're growing in a wrong way. So an example I'll use is eliminating one or two drugs from the marketplace, like heroin or cocaine, would be like eliminating hamburgers and expecting all the people in our society to suddenly not be overweight. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. Because if I eliminate the heroin, I'll find something else. And if I eliminate the hamburgers, I'll find something else to substitute if I have that craving. So what we're talking about here is dependence. And I like to call it dependence with a capital D. And in this dependence, which I love to see young people learning when they're in elementary school, is that it's a state of suspense and we have tension that builds, and then we feel some kind of pain. And when we keep repeating our dependent behaviors, we're into unhealthy dependence, and that becomes addiction, which can affect us at any age or any stage of our lives. And what we're talking about very often is some qualities of addictive people. And so therefore, children who are identified as being, let's say, more insecure, a little more sensitive than other kids, and a little more subject to mood swings, they would be higher risks for addiction. We need to be working on these subjects in school systems and in social agencies to help identify young people who are at higher risk, and then do something about it. You know, train them, help them not to become addicted. And another factor is the DT and W. These are some of the things that go along with addiction. We defend our behavior, we deny it, we develop tolerance for the very things that we think are helping us, and then eventually it's painful to not do them anymore, to withdraw from them. Is the answer to addiction regulation? You know, very often in our governmental society, we tend to turn to government for action in crisis. And we want a new law to be set up, and we prohibit something. We expect that to solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. It just sets up new challenges, and we end up with things like black market and bootlegging and all kinds of other approaches to get the things that we're addicted to. I just want to give you a little history lesson that came from my friend Mark Keller, who's a pioneer in the field of alcoholism. And he told me one time at a presentation he was making that in 459 AD in China, selling or drinking liquor involved beheading. That was the punishment. Do you think it changed the Chinese tendencies to be a little bit addicted? I mean, they probably switched to opium or something else. In Rome, men under 30 were prohibited from drinking wine except in formal occasions. Do you think that stopped drinking in Rome? In the 1800s in the United States, alcohol became an enemy. And then it led to a temperance movement. And then eventually temperance wasn't enough, it became prohibition. And as I said a moment ago, we ended up with illegal production of the substance because people wanted that substance. So it's a little bit like prohibiting marijuana today. Marijuana being prohibited has become one of the largest cash crops in America. It's up there with things like corn and wheat. So does regulation solve the problem? This is outside. This is the outside stuff. It's not the inner journey we're talking about. That's where the addiction comes from. It's the inner craving. It's the physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual stuff that sets the scene for our addictions. So, wiping out addiction, is it like wiping out malaria? Can you spray the swamp and get rid of the mosquitoes? Yes. But you can't do this with something like addiction. It's not that simple. They found out in Iowa, in a very interesting study, about reducing the supply and thinking you're going to fix the problem. Actually, in one study in Iowa, over a period of 18 years, there was an 80% increase in the consumption of alcohol, and yet alcoholism went down. So there's a reverse kind of logic there, that there are cases you can show where people are doing something more or using something more and yet not becoming addicted to it. What I'm getting at here is to focus too much attention on a war against a certain substance or prohibiting a substance is not the answer to the addiction problem. Mark Keller summed it up in one interesting line. He said about addictions, I see people as the cause, not substances. People are the cause. People are the one. And he also said, the bottle isn't chasing the man or the woman. It's the man or the woman that's buying the bottle and using what's in it. We have to be reminded of these basics. We have to change society's attitudes. We have to agree on limits. Nobody has really agreed on what the limit is in drinking. What's appropriate? When should a person stop? When do they become impaired? There are some agencies that think they know the answer to that, but it varies quite a bit. Society has to come to an agreement what moderate drinking really is and what excessive drinking is. And it has to start at the grassroots level. So what we're talking about here, we're talking about the whole person, physically, the PMESS we call it. It's the physical, the mental, emotional, social, and spiritual aspects. It's holistic. And you can't zero in on addiction unless you look at the whole person and the whole society. At Boston's North Conway Institute, where I was affiliated for a number of years with Reverend David Works, and this was a bunch of people who are in various religions that were trying to do something about alcohol and drug problems, and especially in the educational area. He was on a drive, which I still agree with, for responsible decisions. That's what we need to be teaching people how to be responsible about their decisions in what they're doing in their lives. Decisions to eat, decisions to drink, decisions to be involved in relationships. That's the key to it. And that involves also getting into basic values and coming to some agreement on what those values are. Our society is more confused today about basic values. There used to be some common ground, and maybe we're getting back to it again. I hope so. The role of government, I believe, is to do the research, help with the research, and stress the responsible decisions, and then to get the facts to people. That's where government can do some wonderful work, to help get us the facts so we'll know what's going on. Also, the facts about education, to help us understand what education really works and what education doesn't really work too well. Even though we're giving the lectures, showing the films, is it really changing behavior? We need research on that. We need a lot of research. We need research on treatment, how it works. We need research on intervention. Does it work? When does it work? We need research on prevention and education. And we need a lot of research into fundamental educational processes. I'll give you one quick example of that. We've been giving driver education to people for many, many years and reducing their insurance rates because of it. And in one of the studies that I was asked to write about a number of years ago, we found out that there was no particular value in one of the most comprehensive driver ed programs in America. The people who didn't take it drove the same way as the people who took it. So we have to research what we're doing in the field of prevention and the field of education to see that what we do has an effect. We need to research recovery, too, and how it works after we come off an addiction. We need to teach recovery so people will understand it better. And the road to recovery, simple. It sounds simple. It's difficult, but we have to admit the problem, surrender to its reality. We have to ask for help, find out where the help is, but most of all, change behavior. And that's the hardest thing for any human being to do. And that's why we need a lot of help. Recovery doesn't take place overnight. Whether I'm the addict or it's a loved one who's addicted, we have to have a lot of patience with ourselves and with other people. It's a process. It's a journey. It takes time. And in the process, there are certain realities, and we need to change our whole way of living when we come through our addictive processes. We need to change the way we think, in particular, and the words we use, the actions we perform, and our reactions to life and the events of life. But then we're fortunate in our country today to have so much recovery available. We have self-help groups. We have a tremendous awareness today. We have all kinds of therapists available. And these are the people that help us to have new insights. And also there are new trends coming along, too, about ways that we can help each other through things like hypnosis. And there's another program coming through that's just beginning to get popular, and it uses eye movement to help people respond to some of the deep stuff that's helping them to be addicted and to heal from those wounds they might have received in childhood or during a bad marriage or in another traumatic situation. And these things all set us up for addiction. So we've got a major challenge in preventing and educating in this field. We are doing what at the North Conway Institute was described as training the human spirit. And that's a fascinating challenge. And that's something that just doesn't come out of a textbook and get done. It's like we're trying to change behavior and thinking and values. And what we're trying to do is get people to really tune in on the need for recovery. And the need for recovery involves a set of triangles that I like to refer to, and it helps us to understand what addiction is all about. Addiction tends to form triangles. And those triangles separate us from ourselves. The S at the bottom is self, and the A is addiction, and then the other S in the left-hand triangle means I'm being separated from myself, my inner self, when I'm addicted. And I'm being separated from others when I'm addicted, so my relationships are impaired. And then I'm separated from God or my higher power or my Creator when I'm addicted. I'm not relating properly. And that's the reason for not being addicted, or trying not to be as addicted as we once might have been, for example, so that we don't have to be perfect, and we have to slip into our addictions, but the idea is to get people to know when they're becoming addicted so they can prevent the consequences, which are very damaging, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. And a lot of it's to do with filling emptiness. And that emptiness can't be filled by the substances. It can't be filled by the relationships. It can't be filled by all of the excessive behaviors that we get into. That's why we call it a spiritual problem, not a religious problem, a problem of the human spirit. There's a kind of restless emptiness in all of us, and we're trying to fill it, and we want to be fulfilled. And the only way we can be fulfilled spiritually, apparently, is having spiritual behaviors and habits that take the place of all these other pursuits that damage us. And those pursuits are the addictive pursuits. So when we're talking about prevention and education, I'm reminded of my Safety Council years when the National Safety Council came up with this concept of the 3 E's. What they said was that we really can't expect to reduce accidents on the highway unless we deal with enforcement, engineering, and education. And doing any one of those isn't going to do the trick for us. So what we've had to do in our country is have a balanced program of enforcement of the highway laws and development of new engineering, including seat belts and all kinds of other factors like airbags, and then education. And so if we package it all together, we find that we can affect accidents, we can reduce them. The same thing applies to addictions. If we emphasize early intervention, in other words, getting to the root of the matter soon before a person gets severely impaired, if we have more accessible treatment, if we have a lot more research, if we have massive public education based on scientifically proven principles, then we'll have a holistic, comprehensive program that will work, and it will do something, but it'll involve all of society. That's how it'll work, and it'll have to be based on agreed upon values we can live by, values that have become unclear in our society, and maybe we're turning the corner on the values, and maybe we're moving in a direction where we can agree that certain things are good and certain things are not good, and that we should avoid those things. And not so much that we punish the people who do the wrong thing, but help them, educate them, help them to understand how to develop their characters. And that's really what recovery is all about. All the recovery programs, whether they're 12 steps or otherwise, are about character development. And so, just to sum up, what we're talking about is changing behavior. It requires a massive, massive movement to do it. It requires all of society, every aspect of it, and it requires all of us at the local level, including you and me. So thank you for being with me on this particular occasion, talking about prevention and education, and enjoy your journey.